post assignments. All units proceed to your post assignments.
In Mykolaiv, daylight revealed the extent of damage from the overnight missile strikes. Emergency workers in this southern Ukrainian city discovering more civilian targets as they searched for residents in need of help. Buried under the rubble of this apartment building, an 11-year-old child. Digging the boy out took 6 hours. He later died. As NATO defense ministers met for a second day in Brussels, deliberating on how to deal with Russia and better arm Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky asked the alliance for more help, saying Ukraine has only about 10% of what it needs for its air defenses.
We want to have a possibility to close the sky. Our capabilities are not enough. Germany opened up the way to this possibility by providing the first RST system. The United States of America confirmed its support with NASAMS. We would like a lot for this support to be much bigger.
At the conclusion of the meeting, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg pledged the alliance's full support for Kyiv and described a comprehensive assistance package, including drone equipment and drone jammers.
More. They always want more money, more weapons.
Why not? I mean, if you're on the, if you got the golden ticket, you might as well just, cash it in every chance you get. It's the never-ending golden ticket.
Well, we're going to get to that, but first, let's say top of the evening to Tori Mansfield, who now is working for Amazon. You started your training, but we're not going to lose you,
did.
right? We're not going to lose you no matter how hard they work.
I told them Friday nights and Tuesday nights, or Fridays and Tuesdays, I can't work. So. All
right, that's good. So
she has her priorities.
Yeah.
That's right. Anything new and exciting in your life, Scott, that you want to share before we get to the dirty stuff?
No, I mean, I listened to that intro and I just want to go knife hand. I mean, you got going back to the Marine Corps route. Go. So I'm all pumped up. I'm ready. Throw all the questions at me you can. I can deal with it.
All right. You psyched, Tori? We got a lot of comments already.
There's a lot of comments. Yeah, I'm just reading them.
All right. Then let's not waste any time.
All right.
We had your typical busy week. Scott came out with, I think, 3 different 2-minute videos. So those of you who watch this podcast, obviously you can hang in there for the 2 hours or whatever we do. But if you have any friends or relatives who with a short attention span, this is a good way to introduce them to Scott. A lot of information into 2 minutes. There's one on nuclear madness. What was the first one on? Oh, yes, Daria Dugina's murder. And then you did one on Russia expanding its air campaign. And then 3 articles. One in the Consortium News, Pipelines versus USA, and Energy Intelligence, China's hardening stance on Taiwan, and in the Scott Ritter Extra Substack, just published today and generating a huge response, Russia's final pivot toward victory in Ukraine.
With multiple typos, apparently, but
almost all of them have been fixed. Okay. But the essence of it is there, and you once again admit you've been wrong, but nonetheless, you're sticking to the big vision that victory for Russia is inevitable, and this is the final pivot.
Really, you're going to start with, I was wrong.
No,
you're going to lead with that. That's literally your take from the article. You've got one chance to sell it. Your elevator pitch is Scott admits he was wrong. Thanks, Jeff.
I'm struck by the fact that you noted it. It would have never occurred to me. But no, it's you've been dealing with all the twists and turns, so I don't understand make an issue of you sometimes not predicting everything perfectly. This is how it goes in life, when you're predicting.
Well, I think my point was everybody got it wrong. Find me one person right now anywhere in the world that isn't part of Putin's inner circle and the command staff, the people who actually have the Russian playbook, unlike everybody else who says it's a page out of the Russian playbook. Find me anybody outside of that circle that predicted the special military operation. Go. You will not find a single person. No one predicted the special military operation. The CIA didn't, the DIA didn't, the President of the United States didn't, the National Security Agency didn't, the British didn't, the Israelis didn't, nobody did. So, hey, tough luck. I joined that crowd. I'm somebody who believed Russians would go in doctrinally and win the war in, a matter of weeks. Russia didn't go in doctrinally. That was the point I was trying to make.
Right. But you continue to say victory is inevitable. And
there's no other conclusion that can be reached.
But tell us about the final pivot and why you're characterizing it as such.
Well, the final pivot is what happened after the Ukrainian offensive that we've talked about already, the land grab with multiple casualties. Ukraine is still on the offensive. Today we read about 60,000 some odd troops being assembled in the Nikolaev region that are going to threaten Kherson. And this is true, but the way I view this is it's out of the American Civil War. I talk about day 3 of Gettysburg, when the Confederate Army was arrayed in front of the main Union line, and Longstreet had his corps laid out there, and they still had a viable military. But they made the decision to attack. The next thing you know, we have Pickett's charge. And it was grand. It was glorious. They went across the battlefield. They actually breached the Union line. There was one period where Armistead's brigade broke through, and they're waving the flag, and it lasted for about 3.2 seconds before the grape shot and the muskets and the bayonets drove them out, drove the Confederates back, and they were defeated. They never recovered. That took place in July of 1863. Surrender didn't occur until April 1865. So there was a lot of fighting left. But the pivot to victory, to Union victory, was right there that day, day 3, Gettysburg. And we're seeing that equivalent now. The Ukrainians are getting ready to launch this final offensive against Kherson. They have no chance. There's no chance whatsoever. The Russians are waiting for them. The Russians, wisely, have evacuated the civilians from the area. Why? To give them operational maneuverability. That means when the Ukrainians come in, they're going to get smacked like they've never been smacked before, because it's called doctrinal defense. And the Russians are going to hit them hard, maneuver, slaughter them. But notice the Russians actually evacuated the civilians, as opposed to the Ukrainians, who keep the civilians there and use them as human shields. But this is it. This is the high water mark of Ukraine. And from this point on, it's over. There's no way they can recover. Ukraine cannot build forces up fast enough to match the Russian mobilization. And Russia is bringing to bear more firepower than Ukraine will ever be able to assemble. Russia is destroying the Ukrainian infrastructure. This is another part of the pivot. They've stopped playing we're going to be nice to you games, and they now have a general in there, General Armageddon, who is saying, we're going to carry out the equivalent of a strategic air campaign. We're going to destroy your infrastructure. We're going to destroy your lines of communication, your command and control. Soon I anticipate they'll be destroying their leadership targets. And that's what you do when you want to defeat a nation. And Russia has pivoted to the defeat of Ukraine as a nation. No more special military operation. Even though the name stays the same, they're waging war against Ukraine. And that's what I mean by the pivot.
Right. You used a phrase that even idiots like me, who don't really know necessarily the historical origin of it, are familiar with, and that's a Pyrrhic victory. And that's how you refer to Ukraine's recent gains. Basically it means you might have won something in the small picture, but in the big picture, forget it.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine, they right now they're still living off of the glory of taking Kharkov. Yay! So they turned the map from red to blue. But in doing so, they lost about 20,000 guys. And they only killed about 200 Russians. I think Russia can take that casualty ratio all day long. The thing about taking terrain that you can't hold is that it eventually goes back to the other guy. And Ukraine can't hold Kharkiv. They won't be able to hold Odessa. They won't be able to hold anything once they deplete these reserves. These 60,000 troops should be held in reserve. These 60,000 troops should be used as a mobile reserve so the Ukrainians can do to the Russians what the Russians are getting ready to do to the Ukrainians. But that's not what's happening. This is a political game. They're trying to to demoralize the Russian people. They're trying to create this perception of, a fallible Russian, that Putin isn't all powerful. And you see this campaign over and over. John Bolton, one of my favorite mustached walrus-looking type of individuals, even came out and talks about regime change. And one of the things he says, I laughed when I read it, even the Russian people are talking about this now. Really, John? Which Russian person's talking about? Find me one, not the ones that fled, not the ones that are in prison, named Navalny. Yeah, but that's the one he quoted. Even the Russians are talking about it now. Alexander Navalny is talking. I'm like, dude, he's in prison. He has no power. He has nothing. Fine. You know what's going on in Russia right now? The vast majority of the Russians are waking up more patriotic today than they were yesterday, and they're committed to this victory. And that's the reality. Putin is stronger than he's ever been. There's no weakness there. There's no hesitancy. There is just the stoic determination of a nation that's going to get the job done. And that's where we're at.
All right, let's go to the questions from our beloved audience. And I forgot to mention before when I was highlighting your recent work that folks can go to scottritterextra.com to see all of it. We link everywhere. So if you want to read those articles or look at those videos or get familiar with any of Scott's recent work, that's the quickest and easiest way to do it. All right, Galina from our first of the night. Does Europe have to go through the 90s of the Soviet Union, i.e. total social and economic destruction of the society, in order to be reborn into greatness? Do you see any emerging leaders that can take them there?
Short answer is absolutely yes. This is required. Europe right now is held hostage by a political and economic elite that has sold Europe out to American interests. And so we're going to see a fracturing of Europe. I believe we're going to see the demise of the European Union. I believe we're going to see revolutionary change in Europe this winter in certain countries. And that change is going to be prompted by the destruction of the social and economic framework of each of one of these societies. Whether it's going to take a decade, I don't know, but it's going to take some time to rebuild. Germany is screwed. I mean, I apologize for my language, but Germany has some serious problems. You know who else is going to have some very serious problems very soon? Great Britain. And other nations are lining up with difficulty. The question is there anybody there who's going to lead them through? Let me answer it this way. In 1992, had anybody heard of Vladimir Putin? In 1994, could anybody predicted Vladimir Putin would have been appointed president by Boris Yeltsin in 1999? In 1997, could have anybody predicted that? In 1998, could have anybody predicted that? And the answer is no. So my point is, from the chaos that and the the destruction that's going to occur when Europe devolves into a parallel universe like the 1990s in the Soviet Union or in Russia, a leader will emerge. One that's nobody knows right now. It's going to take that chaos to generate the leadership necessary. But what I can say is it won't be anybody from the existing political and economic elite. Their day is done. They are to blame, and I don't believe the European people are going to forgive them. Just like you wouldn't see the Russians running back to Yeltsin. Find me a Russian today to vote for Boris Yeltsin. Hey, if Boris Yeltsin came back alive and wanted to run Russia, how many people would vote for him? Not going to happen. Not going to happen. He's reviled. And every one of these European leaders is going to go down in history with the same kind of stench attached to them as Boris Yeltsin.
All right. Change for sure, because they always do, but we're not sure how. And that poster behind you, Bob Dylan, as he once said, things have changed. That song is going to have some special resonance one day soon. Mark from the United States of America, a little country that I'm familiar with. Do you think the military hardware the USA left in Afghanistan is being used in Ukraine?
No, I think U.S. military hardware that was intended for Afghanistan but never made it is being used in Ukraine. But the stuff that's in Afghanistan is owned by the Taliban. They're not giving it to the Ukrainians. So no, I mean, look, tomorrow someone's going to find a serial number on a rifle and say, "Aha, that was in Afghanistan and it made it to Ukraine," and they'll prove me wrong. Look, you can always find an exception to the rule, but the bottom line is the vast majority of the equipment that the Afghans have under their control is still under their control.
Meaning that possession of the weapons and potentially using them is of more value to them than what they can get from selling them? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, especially, I mean, some of these weapons, look, these weapons are modern. I mean, if you take a look, the Taliban are outfitting their special forces guys in funky looking Western gear with funky looking Western. It's interesting, within a month of taking over Kabul, many of the Taliban units looked like they were American commandos because they had basically taken all that equipment and were using it themselves.
All right. Fashion statement, huh? Thomas Pristula. I recognize this name from a previous episode. Maybe the reason why President Putin isn't declaring war on Ukraine is that the Russian Federation is registered as a corporate entity. Just like the American Civil War, it is at best a mercenary conflict. What do you think, wise inspector?
I think if you went up to the average Russian soldier and called him a mercenary, he'd punch you in the face and stomp on your body. No, Russians are patriots. I think the same thing. If you went to the average Ukrainian soldier, and called him a mercenary, he'd punch you in the face. These are guys who believe in their respective countries. They're fighting and dying for their respective countries. They're not mercenaries, and it's an insult to them to call them mercenaries. That's my answer.
All right. So there, Thomas, there's your answer. Hope you're happy. Tell him, Scott, I'm with you. Joe. You know where Joe's from? I'll tell you, the USA. Boy, these people are so specific. What do you make of conservative, in quotation marks, blogs and talk shows that question mainstream media on almost every issue, but have gone all in for Ukraine? Mark Levin, for example, ranted and screamed at users who did not believe Russia blew up the pipelines.
I think the answer is self-evident. Mark Levin's an idiot. He's always been an idiot. He's a man who makes money from being shrill, from challenging the liberal establishment, but he is a Russian hater from day one. And I don't think there's any conservative people out there on mainstream media other than Tucker Carlson who advocates in a way that is rational when it comes to dealing with Russia. The easiest way to make money on mainstream media is to be anti-Russia. If I could go back in time, and if my only goal in life was to make money, I can tell you right now, I'd be the richest man in the world, because the first thing I would have done is sell out Saddam Hussein like you would never have believed. And he was covered in weapons infrastructure. You know what I could have done with the reputation as a chief weapons inspector, going around saying Saddam did it, Saddam has the weapons? I'd be the darling of all media. And like everybody else who got it wrong, they would never condemn me. And then they bring me back and I join the anti-Putin crowd. The first thing I do is go write a PhD thesis on how bad Putin is. And then I'd be this advisor, everybody, Scott Ritter, Putin expert. And I'd be rolling in money. They'd make movies about me. But I'd also be a lying sack of manure. And I wouldn't be happy with who I am. No, Mark Levin and the rest of their ilk are useless. They're totally useless human beings when it comes to doing what they claim to be doing, which is to shed light on the truth. They don't shed light on the truth. They shed light on conspiracy theories. They shed light on negativism. I don't know if that's a word, negativism, but negativity, that could be another word.
There you go.
But, these are...
You missed that comment, but it's a nice compliment about your hair. You missed it.
I need a haircut.
No. The guy was saying your hair looks better than his, and you're 25 years older than he is.
I was accused of having a toupee, so I got to make sure I get the glue on right or something. But
well, you almost get two different reasons for Levin's answer, and I don't have expect you to know for sure what's motivating him. But the first thing you said was he's an idiot. And the second thing you said was he's motivated by financial gain, which isn't quite the same thing as being an idiot. One suggests he believes what he's saying. The other suggests he's deliberately lying to enrich himself. I guess it's hard to tell which it is. Okay.
He's an idiot who wants to make money.
All right. Thank you for giving such a thoughtful response. Next question. Nikolay Kirov from the Russian Federation. Not Russia, but the Russian Federation. More and more, or as we like to say, Mother Russia. More and more former ideological enemies of Russia, for example, ex-U.S. military and U.S. patriots like you, Douglas McGregor, John Mark Dougan, Richard Black, etc., talk the same, like pro-Kremlin TV channels and bloggers. By the way, some of these questions I have to condense because they're too long, and so just so you know, Scott, this person is not criticizing you. It might kind of seem that way, but I know from reading the rest of his speech that that's not where he's coming from.
But you got to finish the question.
Thoughts?
Oh, there we go. Now I can have a thought on this. Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I was going to give a snide response about how we all went to the same ideological preparatory school, and we've been programmed that we receive cassette tapes at night and we listen to them in our sleep. And it teaches us to talk the same way. Look, I will say this. There's a certain class of military professional who was trained to challenge conventional thinking. Not to be an obstructionist, but the job was challenge conventional thinking, to question everything. And I think you'll find those people who approach their military career in that fashion are probably aligned with what I'm saying, what Douglas McGregor is saying, what Colonel Black is saying, and Mr. Dougan is saying, and others. Now, why would we be speaking the same as the Russian military blogs? Let's take them out for a second. Well, let's start with the blogs. Let's assume that in this case, because I'm not somebody who believes that Russia's always right. We could do an entire show on where I think Russia's been wrong in history and things of that nature. But we're talking about Ukraine, specifically Ukraine. And I firmly believe that Russia is on the right side of history here. I firmly believe that Russia tried to do everything short of war to prevent this conflict, and that they've waged this conflict with an exceedingly soft touch for the specific purpose of trying to save Ukrainian infrastructure and Ukrainian life. But I don't believe the Russians are infallible. I think the article I just wrote points out some criticisms I have of how the Russians have carried this out. And I think you'll find that many of the Russian bloggers and the people on the conservative Russian talk shows speak the same way, because on this issue, when you're on the right side of history, the facts align. And when the facts align, the logic that is derived from those facts will be similar in nature. So if you have Americans like me who develop their opinion independent of the Russian bloggers, we don't sit there and coordinate every day. Hey, what are you going to say? What's your talking points? No, we go because we believe Russia's on the right side of history. We believe that the fact set that's being presented by Russia is fundamentally correct and accurate, and therefore the analysis that will be derived from it will be consistent to that fact set. If the Russian bloggers are operating off the same fact set and using logic to drive their analysis, there will be a parallel between the two. That doesn't mean that we are coordinating with other. It just means we're both working off of a similar fact set, and we both are articulating in favor of the narrative because we believe Russia's on the right side of history.
All right. So you're not a Kremlin agent? Are we supposed to read between the lines and reach that conclusion?
The email I received from the Kremlin told me never to admit being a Kremlin agent, so I can't admit that.
All right. JS from Barcelona. When Russia has fulfilled its objectives in Ukraine, dramatic changes will inevitably take place in the structure of the world system. In your opinion, what outcomes can occur? What possible scenarios can we find?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that Ukraine is part and parcel of a larger struggle taking place between Russia and the collective West, which in this case means Europe, the United States, Canada, maybe Japan, maybe South Korea. The conflict, the war, I mean, right off the bat, we're going to see that Ukraine is destroyed as a nation state. That's the bottom line. That's tragic for Ukraine. But more than that, we're going to see that this conflict is going to totally remake Europe and the European Union and NATO, these two big institutions, and the G7. All three of these foundational institutions for what we call the rules-based international order are going to be fractured. They might even be destroyed by the end of this winter. This is going to create, because right now Europe is a power center of gravity for the world. The economy of Europe prior to this conflict was sufficiently strong enough to influence the world. And when you combine the European economy with the American economy, understanding that America is the puppet master to the European puppet, now we even have a greater center of gravity. I think we're going to see the European aspect of this start to collapse start to break down. For instance, Germany. The German economy is a very strong economy, but the foundation of its strength comes from the quality of its industry, the quality of the workers, and therefore the quality of the product, which then creates good salaries, which then creates a very stable and rich tax base that Germany can draw upon to create great infrastructure, great education, great health care, things of this nature, and great perks. I mean, I'd love to be a German. How many 30-day vacations a year can you take? Apparently more than one. The Germans have a great lifestyle, but what gave them this lifestyle? Cheap Russian gas. Germany wouldn't be Germany today without cheap Russian gas. And Germany is the heart and soul of the Eurozone. Without the German mark, there is no euro. There literally won't be a euro. Germany is about to collapse, is in the process of collapsing. All these industries, they need cheap Russian gas to function. Without cheap Russian gas, their alternative is either to bring in very, very, very expensive American liquid natural gas, which today is running 10 times more expensive than it was in January. They can't afford that, because the second you plug into the very expensive American gas, the price of everything goes out of control. No German industry can survive paying those premiums. So what's their option then? To shut down. What happens when you close an industry? You're not paying the worker. What happens to this worker, this highly paid, highly skilled worker? He or she have to go find another job. They can't live in the community by this factory because they can't afford to pay the mortgage anymore. They're not making the salary. So they leave. That community that was dependent upon these, middle-class salaries to have the tax base so that they could do things, that community is going to collapse. We're going to see in Germany a replication of the Rust Belt, the American Rust Belt that broke out and is still breaking out in many parts. Germany is going to devolve into literally third world status. And there's nothing that Germany can do to recover from this. And when Germany collapses, the Eurozone collapses. And when it collapses, the European Union collapses. And as that's happening, NATO is going to collapse. And then the G7 is supposed to be the 7 largest, most influential economies in the world. Well, what happens when you get rid of Germany, when you get rid of France, when you get rid of Great Britain, when you get rid of Italy? Now it's the G3. That's not too impressive. So, it's going to replace the G7? BRICS. It's already replaced them. BRICS is far more influential today than G7 will ever be. So there's going to be this power vacuum that's going to be created. It's going to be filled by Asia. And Russia is the pivot. Russia used to be focused on the West. Russia's now going to pivot to Asia. They're in the process of pivoting to Asia. This is a pivot that began long ago, but it's something that came into light before the Russian invasion. February 4th, the Beijing Olympics, the one that Joe Biden brilliantly avoided. What a moron. I mean, diplomacy is you can't be diplomatic if you avoid the meetings where diplomacy takes place. Biden kept saying how he wants to, manage China, downplay Russia, etc. So what did he do? Instead of going to Beijing, where the Chinese would have had to receive him, have meetings with him, listen to what he says, and considers what he says, meaning they can't act on anything they want to do with Russia until that happens. Biden just stayed out, and the Chinese went, great, focus on the Russians. February 4th, 5,000-word joint statement, which redefined the world as not as anymore as the singularity with everything revolving around America, but a multipolar world where Russia, China, and other nations are all co-equal. And they said the rules-based international order that the United States uses to define its presence in the world today is over, finished, done. They're not even going to consider it anymore. What's replaced it? The law-based international order of multipolar equals, where Russia, China, and other nations will lead the world. Now, that was all theoretical. Now we're seeing it break out in practice. It's real. It exists. It's happening. So, yes, this conflict, this defeat of Ukraine is going to change the world. The world will never be the same after this. I think everybody needs to understand that they are living in one of those moments in history that historians, if we survive, we don't kill each other in a nuclear holocaust, historians will be writing about this time. It's an exciting time. Sometimes exciting isn't good. Exciting, when you drive your car over a cliff, it's pretty exciting on the way down until you hit and then you're dead. But we're living in exciting times. This is historic, what's happening right now. We are seeing the end of an era, the end of an empire, and the birth of something new. And we don't know exactly what this something new is going to be, but it's going to be there. That's a certainty. And if you're an American, it's going to be scary because the world isn't going to be the same. It's not the world that we grew up in, our fathers grew up in, our grandfathers grew up in. This is going to be a completely different world. And I don't know how the world's going to receive us. Hopefully there'll be a lot of forgiveness and we'll be allowed back into the club room. But it's changing. It's over. The world that we knew is over. Something new is coming.
All right. Well, the standard of living is declining in Germany and many other places. But apparently in Poughkeepsie, New York, people still can afford to go out to dinner. Let's hope so anyway, because our favorite weapons inspector will be there on October 26th at Farmers and Chefs. So you can have great dinner and great conversation, and Scott will sign his book for you if you'd like. And if you want more info, just go to scottritterextra.com, as always, because it links to all things Ritter, and you can make your reservation at event if you're going to be near Poughkeepsie or you think you can make your way to Poughkeepsie, New York.
And I can guarantee that the author will stay and sign every book that anybody wants signed.
All right. And if people need to be comforted about these changes we're going through, you'll kind of put on your psychiatrist hat also and calm them down.
Depends on what kind of beer is there.
All right. Joao from Hungary. Do you see a scenario where a peace deal is made that will involve a partition of Ukraine similar to the Korean Peninsula with a heavy militarized nuclear border?
No, that would be a defeat for Russia. Russia's goal and objective here is a new European security framework that avoids that very scenario. I don't see that. I see a situation where Russia destroys Ukraine as a nation state, something new emerges. I also see a situation where NATO is so weakened and fractured, both by overcommitting to Ukraine and also by NATO is a military alliance that, it consists of independent nation states, most of whom are part of the European Union, and many of whom take their marching orders from the G7. but as the EU and the G7 fracture, so will NATO. And I think there's going to be a very weakened, chastised Europe that's going to be desperate for what Russia has to offer, which is a new European security framework that takes into account their concerns as well as Russian concerns and captures it in a quantifiable fashion in the form of a treaty. That's what the Russians want. And I think, Europe rejected that in December. I don't think Europe's going to be in the rejection mode, because when Russia wins this conflict, Europe has an option of either bankrupting itself further to try and build up a military capability to defend against a Russian aggression that isn't coming. Russia doesn't want to take over Europe. Or reality can set in and people will say, why don't we actually sit down with the Russians, talk to the Russians, and come up with a negotiated settlement that de-escalates, demilitarizes the environment. The last thing Russia wants is a strong militarized border with NATO. What they really want is some sort of neutral zone that separates Europe from Russia. And even after that separation, instead of having massive armies built up to de-escalate, learn to peacefully coexist, and reduce, not increase, the military burden on all these nations. I think that's the Russian objective, and I'm pretty certain that Europe will be convinced that that's probably the best outcome for them as well.
All right, we're moving at a great pace. Hopefully we'll have time to get to some of the live questions as well. We have a lot of people watching live and asking questions in the comments. Just a little warning there, Scott. Jean Doe from Western Europe. How realistic is a sabotage or swapping of equipment for upcoming NATO exercises? For example, a warhead fired, legitimate target, taking off on its own towards predefined coordinates in eastern direction. See what Gene's coming from there?
I do, but it's not going to happen. First of all, one warhead, a nuclear warhead, they don't use live nukes in exercises. One warhead is literally not going to change the world. And no, I understand where he's coming from. I understand the suspicion. Nobody trusts the West, but no, I don't see that happening at all.
All right. Gene has an imagination, in other words.
Well,
the whole Doe family is known for their hallucinations. You know about the Western European Does. You've heard about them, right? How about Matt Spack from New York? New York! What do you have to say to the wacko conspiracy theorists who constantly push out the idea of a U.S.-Ukraine nuclear false flag as a means of NATO going into all-out war with Russia? How can we debunk these friggin' idiots? That's my New York accent. Pretty bad, huh?
I'm not allowed to do accents.
Okay.
I'm not allowed to do a lot of things anymore, but I'm not allowed to do accents. So,
hey, one week your wants you to give shorter answers. Was that your cute way of referring to Marina?
I'm not allowed to mention her name on the broadcast.
Oh, she's like, I can barely say anything.
She's like Voldemort, that who will remain unnamed.
Okay. Is that who you meant by your editor, though? Okay, well, forget it.
My editor is my lovely wife of 31 years.
Exactly. Okay.
Who has made me who I am, for better or worse, richer or poorer.
I responded to somebody who asked a question about that. That's why I was asking. All right, never mind. Forget I said anything.
The conspiracy. Look, on the one hand, the best way to debunk the idea is to point out that Russia doesn't have a doctrine of nuclear preemption. So anybody who thinks Russia is going to nuke Ukraine first, it just isn't going to happen. It just isn't. Russia's not going to launch a preemptive strike against NATO either. So what we have right now is a bunch of fear mongers in the West who are trying to create the perception that Russia is this out of control nation that's threatening to nuke everybody and has to be put down like a rabid dog. But let's put it this way. It's not Russia that said they're looking for a preemptive nuclear strike. That was the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, who panicked once missiles started hitting his energy hubs came on and said, NATO has to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against Russia if it's serious. If NATO's serious about supporting Ukraine, you have to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against Russia. All right, now people can dismiss that, except Jan Stoltenberg then comes out and says something, and he's the Secretary General of NATO. I'm told I have to stop saying Jan. It's Jans or Jins, but it's not Jan apparently, but I just call him Jan. Jan Stoltenberg comes out and he gives the statement that says a Russian victory in Ukraine, which the concept of him saying this is absurd because I thought he was just saying that Russia's losing. Russia's losing, Russia's losing, Russia's losing. Suddenly he's out there saying a Russian victory, meaning, whoa, maybe Russia's winning. A Russian victory in Ukraine would be a defeat for NATO. I didn't realize NATO was at war with Russia, but apparently Jan Stoltenberg believe so. Well, because NATO is at war with Russia. They just don't formally admit it, but they are waging a proxy conflict with Russia. And the Russians know this. That's why Putin talks about Russia versus the collective West. But then he says, in order to prove that NATO is a serious organization, NATO must flex its nuclear deterrence muscle. And that's why NATO is going to hold, in the coming week, a nuclear exercise. Now, this exercise will involve NATO aircraft being uploaded with dummy nuclear bombs, B-61 bombs, and then flying simulated strike missions against Russian targets. I mean, it looks like a preemptive attack. It looks like NATO's actually getting ready to do what Ukraine has asked them to do, even though everybody says we're not going to do it. Perceptions. The visual is NATO is loading up nuclear-capable aircraft in an exercise with weapons that simulate nuclear bombs, but there's no Russian inspectors there. They don't know it's not a nuclear bomb. And then they're going to fly them on a flight profile that simulates an attack against Russian targets. And if you're a Russian, you just can't sit there and go, well, that's all interesting. Yeah, don't worry about it. Because if it is a nuclear preemptive strike, you got big problems. So what's Russia supposed to do? Put their nuclear forces on high alert? They did that in 1983. And the last time NATO ran a large-scale nuclear exercise, Able Archer 83, and we almost had a thermonuclear conflict. The only good thing that came out of Able Archer 83 is when Ronald Reagan was briefed by the CIA about it later, and they said, hey, you remember that exercise we did? The Russians thought we were really going to attack them, so they put their nuclear forces on high alert. And Reagan went, why would they ever think that? They couldn't. Are you serious? Did the Soviets really think we're going to attack? And they said, yes. That scared the poop out of Reagan. Literally. I don't know about literally, figuratively.
I have to get that image out of my mind now.
Sorry. But you know, what came out of that was Reagan saying, we need to get serious about nuclear disarmament. That led to the INF Treaty. That led to getting rid of the very weapons that he was afraid of. But the point is, who's using their brain right now in NATO? Why is Stoltenberg even allowed to speak anymore? He should be permanently put on mute. He should never be allowed to speak again. But it's not just Stoltenberg. Who in NATO thinks it's a good idea to run a nuclear exercise when your proxy, Zelensky, has begged for you to launch a preemptive nuclear strike? The smartest thing in the world would be for NATO to say the optics aren't good at this time. We want to de-escalate this problem. We want to get rid of any irresponsible talk about the use of nuclear weapons, and we're postponing this exercise until a later date. That's what responsible people would do. NATO is not a responsible organization, and what they're getting ready to do next week is sheer insanity.
Okay. I found somebody who knows how to do a good New York accent.
I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown. I amuse you.
That's I amuse you.
He's actually funny.
Yeah. From Menlo Park, California. Is World War III inevitable due to the U.S. economy collapsing and or civil unrest in response to economic woes, and war being the only way for the elites to maintain power?
Depends on how you define World War III. If it's defined purely in a conventional standpoint, I think the United States may not go gently into that good night. We may not be graceful about the devolution of American economic and diplomatic power. On the other hand, I don't think the American people, you know, we have a lot of problems here at home. And I think the American people might become more interested on solving the problems here at home than they are about engaging in endless conflict around the world. The next generation of American political leadership is critical, and there's going to be a big change, I believe, this fall. I think the Republicans are probably going to take the House back, and they may very well take the Senate back. And the reason why they're taking them back is because of dissatisfaction amongst the American electorate to the economic aspects of the Biden administration. That's the sort of the number one. All the polling suggests that that's the number one issue. And so I think it's going to be more and more difficult for a Republican-controlled Congress to explain why they're giving away tens of billions of dollars to a failed regime in Ukraine at a time when the Americans need it here at home. So I think we're going to see a gradual drift away from the neoliberal, neoconservative engagement with the world where America must lead from the front and dominate everything. And I think we might be seeing a return to some sort of isolationism where America is more focused on fixing the problems at home than they are about controlling the world. But the problem is the problems at home require a healthy economy. And the American economy cannot be sustained at its current rate of wealth based upon the resources that are inherently available to the United States. We need to access resources around the world at prices lower than the market rate, because if we had to pay market prices, we couldn't function here at home. And that requires an aggressive foreign policy that's backed up by military power. So we're in a catch-22. Even if we don't want to go to war, we will have to remain engaged in the world and continue to find a way to keep the rules-based international order that makes all things possible for us viable for as long as possible. This is going to inherently put us in conflict with the people who are winning this economic crisis, this economic conflict, and that is Russia, China, BRICS. They're the ones that have the upper hand. They're the ones that are going to be redefining global commerce, global supply chains, resource management. The United States increasingly is going to end up on the short end of the stick. We've already seen that. There was a time when the United States could pick up the phone to Saudi Arabia and basically ask for any production rate of oil that we wanted, because we built the Aramco, the American Arab Oil Company, and we designed Saudi oil infrastructure with an overproduction capacity so that Saudis could increase the level of oil when we needed oil increase in the global market, or decrease the level of oil when we needed decreased. The Saudis were our thermometer, barometer, whatever. They controlled the temperature. The Saudis, Biden went to Saudi Arabia in July and begged them to increase the amount of oil production to by 1 million barrels a day. The Saudis told him at the time, "Well, consider it, but we'll get back to you in August when there's a meeting of OPEC plus." The plus is Russia. So what the Saudis told Biden is, "We'll get back to you, but first we got to ask the Russians what they want," because the Saudis know the most influential nation in the world about global energy security is Russia. You can't talk global energy security without Russia. The United States seems to have forgotten that. We chastise, we mock Russia as a gas station disguised as a country. Okay, if you want to do that, then admit that you're nothing more than an expensive BMW that guzzles gas, and the only gas station that's available to you is the Russian gas station. So you better think twice about sanctioning that gas station, because you're going to find yourself on a long distance trip stuck on a highway with an empty tank and nowhere to get gas. And that's where Europe is right now, and that's where the United States is heading. This is the kind of stupidity that exists in the West. But now Biden is hurting because he needs to keep gas prices down. This is how stupid the American people are. If they actually believe that low gas prices are because Biden has a healthy economy, that they don't know anything about how he's been dumping the strategic petroleum reserve on the market to suppress prices, just to fake out the American public until the midterm election. But now he's been outmaneuvered because he wants to not only increase the amount of oil, but he wants to cap Russia's price, meaning here's the United States taking advantage of the fact that we blew up a pipeline, the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline, and we put Germany and Europe into an economic tailspin. They are sinking quick, faster than the Titanic. And what we're doing is chugging in ships with liquid natural gas. And the price of our product has gone up tenfold. It was $300 per whatever unit they sell liquid natural gas in. It's now $3,000 and going up. It's windfall profits. It's worse than windfall profits. It's literally sick what we're doing, the profits we're making. But while we're raking in this money, we're telling the Russians, you can't make any money. You are not allowed to make money. We're going to cap the amount of money Russia's allowed to make. And the Russians went to the Saudis and said, there but for the grace of Allah go you. That if the Americans can cap us, they can cap you. They can cap anybody in the OPEC cartel. We can't allow this to happen. So the Saudis and the Russians got together and they told Joe Biden to pound sand. They said, not only are we not going to increase oil by 1 million barrels a day, we're going to decrease the production of oil by 2 million barrels a day. And this means Biden is screwed because he can't release enough oil to compensate for this. Prices are going to go up, inflation's going to go up, and it's going to hit them at the worst possible time, right before the election. And the world and all Americans are going to wake up and see that Joe Biden sucks as a leader when it comes to the economy. And that's because Russia's outplaying them. Russia's outmaneuvering them. Russia's outmaneuvering everybody. We blew up a pipeline thinking that we're going to control the provision of natural gas. Russia sat down with the Turks because there's another pipeline that comes from Turkey called Turk Stream. And it comes in and it feeds into southern Europe. Well, Putin's come up and said, hey, why don't we build another pipeline? We'll call it Turk Stream 2. Imagine that, the creativity of these Russians. Turk Stream 2 is going to come in, and now Turkey is going to be converted into what they call an energy hub. Turkey is going to be the major supplier of gas to Europe, to North Africa, to the Middle East. It's going to be a big deal. And this is really good for the Turks because it will help their economy tremendously. The Turks say, yeah, we're in. Sign us up. And now Europe, who's supposed to be starved of gas, is sitting there looking at the expensive American gas going, we can't afford it. What? Wait a minute. Turk Stream 2? Sign me up. And Russia's going to be right back into the European gas business. But there will be no price cap on their gas. And to show you how divisive this is, Hungary is right now working with Serbia and Bulgaria to, bring this Turkish gas in and get themselves linked up to it. You know what remember Italy was talking about, we're going to make some change, but the European Union said, we got tools that we can use against you. Well, Europe just used those tools because Hungary wants to survive economically and won't participate in the sanctions. Europe has declared Hungary to be undemocratic, and they're sanctioning Hungary now just because Hungary decided they didn't want to commit economic suicide. And this is the beginning of the end of Europe. Trust me on this one. Hungary is not the first nation that's going to go over to the dark side, meaning Russian gas. As the winters get longer, get colder, and there's more desperation in Europe, you're going to see everybody coming over to the Turkish energy hub saying, how do we get some of this into our homes? And what, is the European Union going to start sanctioning everybody? And how long until the people that are being sanctioned say, we don't want to be part of the European Union anymore? And what happens when a NATO member says, I don't want to be part of the European Union? And they withdraw from that. Do they withdraw from NATO now? This is the end of Europe as we currently know it. And the Russians are solely responsible for it because they're 20 times smarter than anybody in the United States and Europe about global energy security.
Right. Tori and I have been hosting a podcast on Tuesday nights called Scenes from the Evolution, and it's going very well. A lot of the folks who are your fans, Scott, have been tuning in, and our audience is growing. We had over 2,000 viewers last week on YouTube alone. And this coming Tuesday, our guest will be U.S. Senate candidate Diane Sare. And she is like our favorite weapons inspector on the Ukraine blacklist. So I guess we'll get into that topic with her and others. Now, I forgot, you are such a busy guy. I forgot to even mention before in D.C. last week to speak on behalf of Julian Assange. What was
I,
you want to
I
just briefly?
did. I gave one of my best speeches ever.
I agree. We have it on our YouTube channel. Why do I mean? I think just about every speech you give is great, but why do you pick that one as one of your best? Or are you just kidding?
Well, I don't know. I'm not. I'm loath to judge myself. Well, let me. Do we have 30 seconds?
We have 42 seconds, but no more.
No, I was working on this. I actually did some research. I researched the United States versus the New York Times. I was ready to incorporate this into my presentation, but then I was told, Scott, there's gonna be an intermission, and then this speaker's gonna speak, and you're gonna come up. I'm like, okay, I got that. So I'm hanging out with my daughters, and we're having fun, talking, meeting people, and I'm as starstruck as anybody else. So when I see Jill Steinberg, is that the Green candidate for president?
Jill Stein. Is it Stein?
Jill Stein.
Yeah.
Jill Stein.
Yeah.
Medea Benjamin, Chris Hedges, Garland Nixon. So we're all going getting our pictures taken, selfies, and all of a sudden in the background I hear the microphone. And next up, Scott Ritter. And I'm like, whoa, I'm not ready. I have no idea what I'm going to say. Literally no clue whatsoever. And I step up there and I got the microphone in my hand and my mouth opened and there it went. And I just made it up as I went along. I knew that Julian Assange was born the same year that the Supreme Court case came out. And so I said, 1971, and in that year, Julian Assange was born. And I paused because I literally didn't know what I was going to say next. And I fortunately caught on and I survived and I finished with an aplomb. I looked up at the flag and I'm like, okay, now I'm pointing at the flag. I better come up with something good. And then the Jolly Roger statement came out, piracy on American democracy. So it worked out. But I literally had no clue what I was going to say when I stepped up to the podium.
Well, I bet it was something like what Tori and I were discussing in a recent episode of Scenes from the Evolution, which is that artists have said, like in particular musical artists, that they channel things. Like when they write a song, like where does it come from? Bob Dylan has said this and various other artists too. And, once you're in the zone and you're a guy who's prepared in general, you can do that. And so I guess you channeled it. I channeled it. Yeah. We need to make a T-shirt that says "Channel it." All right, T-shirt department, get on it. Dmitry from Khabarovsk. Is that how I pronounce it? Khabarovsk. Khabarovsk, Russia. Russophobia has to be eliminated from the USA if we want any meaningful peace between the USA and Russia. Do you think this can be done, and how? I am familiar with the USA and its society, and I do not see any simple ways, frankly. Well, look, there's nothing going to be simple about this. You're talking about the deprogramming of a society. The American public has been programmed to be Russophobic for years. Every time you turn on the TV, mainstream media, go to Rachel Maddow. Don't go to Rachel Maddow, but if you watch Rachel Maddow, she's just all over Russia. Putin's bad, Russia's evil, boom. Everybody's that way. What can be done about it? Look, in addition to this show where we answer questions and try to humanize Russia, I do another show called I forget what it's called, the Scott Ritter Show. but that show. You lost the apology, so that's good. We like that. Look, I wanted to call it Great Conversations or dynamic dialogue, something like that. But they stuck with the Scott Ritter Show. But on that show, I bring on a Russian guest every week, and the idea is to have a conversation with a Russian so that the Russian can explain Russia to me, an American, and by doing so, explain it to an American audience. So it's a process of trying to deprogram American society. Anybody who watches it will hopefully walk away and say, I never thought of it that way. That's something new. I learned something new every week. And I'm somebody who studies Russia. So I do that. And you and I are talking about, at some point in time, doing what we're doing here
and trying to create bridges of connectivity between American society and Russian society to encourage Russians and Americans to talk with each other, to converse, to learn, to educate. Russophobia is a fear. It's a fear of Russia. And fear is generated by ignorance. And the best way to overcome fear is to empower people with knowledge and information. And that's what we're trying to do here on this show. That's what I try and do everything that I do. Not because I'm pro-Russian. I'm pro-humanity. I'm pro-American. I think it's important that rather than learning to kill each other and hating each other, that we actually learn that we all really care about the same thing in the end. We want the same thing. We're the same kind of people. We might listen to different music. We might eat different kinds of food, but try the food. It's not bad. Listen to the music. It's not bad. Talk to the people. You'll find out they're not evil. They're just like you. They laugh. They cry. It's the same thing, just a different language. So don't try and learn the language, though, because that's the other thing I've been banned from. I'm not allowed to speak Russian ever again. So it's over for me.
Russia, if you're listening.
Okay, Rob H. from Virginia. Can history repeat itself in Germany? Previously, the leadership left the German people cold, hungry, upset, and jobless, which created the opportunity for a far-right gifted rise through the political ranks.
Short answer is yes. I mean, Germany's going to go through a very dangerous time, and from this this chaos that's going to erupt in Germany and in Europe, you're going to see different political factions come into power. Factions that have been suppressed by the current political and economic elite. And Germany already has its fertile ground for far-right movements. There is a nascent Nazi movement in Germany. You would think that could never happen, but it's there. It's under the surface. The skinheads, the Nazis, they're there. And when Germany collapses, you will see them emerge. And there will probably be street battles all throughout Germany between the Nazis and the communists, the Nazis and the leftists. It's exactly what happened in the 1920s and 1930s. So yeah, I mean, if somebody emerges there from the far right who captures the imagination of a desperate German people, who tells them that Germany can be great again, and they buy into it, and they get the trains to run on time, and they get the factories to open up, they get the jobs to come back, we could have a nice little mustachioed leader once again in Germany. It's a very dangerous time, which is why it would have been smart for the United States not to deliberately cripple Germany by blowing up their pipeline.
Okay, somebody named Sammy Davis was asking where they can see the Scott Ritter Show. So one way to do it is just to go on YouTube and search Scott Ritter Show, and you'll find it that way. Also, we could embed it on our website if a little adjustment was made. Did you ever see my email about that, Scott? About there's a weird thing that happens within the settings of YouTube, and sometimes when somebody tries to embed a YouTube video on their website, they can't do it because it has not enabled it. Did you happen to see that?
No, I might have deleted it. I get about, literally, if I don't start deleting my emails first thing in the morning, by noon I'll have 600, and by the afternoon I'll have 5,000. So I try and scram through them a couple times a day, and I try to save the ones that need to be read and get rid of the ones that don't need to be read. So maybe, Jeff, maybe I got rid of yours, and you might want to resend it, and I'll try not to hit delete.
Okay. Your audience will increase drastically after you do this. But I don't know if you grasp what I'm saying. There's the answer. Yeah.
No, I grasp what you're saying. But I have to send.
Yeah, just forward my email to people.
That's right. I'm not in control of any of this. My Kremlin controllers are. I have to send it to Putin's office, and Putin will personally oversee the adjustments necessary.
All right. We got something accomplished.
Able Archer 83. We got a guy. My signal unit did radar telemetry for Pershing 2s. See? History is real and living.
Sparky, by the way, beats the system. Sparky makes a lot of small super chat tips and then just keeps asking questions. And Tori falls for it every time.
Oh, we got a chuckle.
John R. out of rural Idaho. There's not a lot of urban areas there. It's just Boise. Isn't all of Idaho rural except for Boise? Are depleted uranium shells being used in rural Idaho? No, I don't know.
I don't think in rural Idaho. Look, I know the United States makes extensive use of depleted uranium shells. I mean, the stuff cuts through armor like a hot knife through butter. So there's an attractiveness to it, but that also it leaves contamination. It causes harm to Americans who use it. It causes harm to civilians who live in the area afterwards. It's a horrible weapon, but I understand the attractiveness of it. Trust me, when you have an enemy armored vehicle coming at you and you got an A-10 coming in with a 30 millimeter Gatling gun that fires depleted uranium rounds, knowing it's just going to just eviscerate that tank, you love depleted uranium at that point in time. But it's a bad thing. Do the Russians use it? I don't know, to be honest. That's a good question. I have to go and find out if the Russians use depleted uranium as a munition enhancement. I think not. I think this is one of these exclusive American things, but I will definitely do the research because I don't want to be accused of saying something that's not accurate.
You see this guy, Igor, he posts every week. He says he's in the Russian military. Have you ever noticed his comments?
Well, I see this one. My whole battalion unit is watching you in Bakhmut right now. That means he's with Wagner, I think, or a unit like that. And stay safe, guys. I mean, it's a tough fight that they're doing in Bakhmut right now. It's one of the areas where the Russians have the initiative and they're driving the Ukrainians back. But it's also very dangerous fighting, urban fighting, trench warfare. So, Igor, best of luck. Stay safe, and I hope we can hear from you next week.
That photo of him doesn't look like a soldier. He's dressed in a suit and he's sitting on a sports car.
He's Wagner, definitely, because they're overpaid Hollywood types. I'm going to get in trouble.
we have now come to the final prepared in advance, submitted in advance question. From Nick Andridge, or something like that, maybe, in Colorado Springs. How many young people actually left Russia to avoid being drafted, and where did most of them go?
Well, we don't have the exact numbers. First of all, let's start with the premise that they left Russia to avoid being drafted. Very few people left Russia to avoid being drafted. Why? Because you're not being drafted. You're either in the reserves or you're not in the reserves. You either served in the military prior or you didn't. And if you never served in the military, you're not going to be called up for this partial mobilization or any mobilization of the reserves. And there's 25 million people ahead of you before your name gets called up. So the people who fled weren't fleeing because they were about to be rounded up. They're fleeing because they either don't like Putin, they don't want to support this conflict, or they want to help generate the perception of mass discontent, or they're just plain old cowards. I mean, I'm going to call it as I see it. If you fled during this period of time, Russia has no use for you, because you're fleeing your motherland in a time of need. If you don't understand what's going on in Ukraine, then you're ignorant, or you're a paid agent of the West. How many of them left? We don't know. We received, there's numbers that are published about, 240,000, 250,000. A lot of them went to Kazakhstan. A lot of them went to Georgia. A lot went to Armenia. A lot went across the border into Finland. They fled. The interesting thing is they were allowed to flee. The Russians could have put a checkpoint.
We haven't
generated that.
We haven't had the baby crying as a sound effect in a while. It felt like it might fit how you were characterizing these people.
Oh, okay.
Sorry for the interruption.
Well, no, that this sounds like where's the general? What's going on? But no, Jeff, you threw me off.
I'm sorry.
Threw me off.
I'm terrible.
No, the point is,
I'm
we
sad
don't
to
know.
talk to the show. I apologize.
Yeah, we don't know how many exactly fled. It's a significant number. It's not an insignificant number, except when you look at it this way. You know, everybody talks about Russia not being a democracy. Russia is a democracy. Vladimir Putin was voted in through a democratic process. Generally speaking, at the polls, Vladimir Putin will pull anywhere between, 53% and, close to 70% of the vote. But that means, let's say he gets 70%. That means that 30% didn't vote for him. And of that 30%, there's a significant number, let's call it 20%, that really don't like him. And there are plenty of people in Russia who straight up don't like Vladimir Putin. And 20% of 150 million is 30 million people. And given the fact that we have, generally speaking, about 50-50 split between men and women, that's 15 million men. And of that 15 million men, let's say that 7 million of them fall within the age parameters that are being called up. So of the 7 million men who hate Vladimir Putin, 200,000 of them fled. I'm not too impressed with the statistics here. I think that a lot of this fleeing was part and parcel of a concerted effort that's being waged by anti-Putin elements to create the perception of deep and meaningful discontent inside inside Russia. And it's part of an overall strategy that some people call the death by 1,000 cuts, meaning that you're just going to sit there and you're going to nick Putin here, there, everywhere, and eventually Russian society is going to be overwhelmed with this sense of failure as a leader. And then there will be a new Moscow Maidan. That's what Zelensky wants, a Moscow Maidan that overthrows Putin. That's what John Bolton wants. John Bolton is sitting there begging the Russian people to do this. He heard it from the Russian people that they're ready. Oh, yeah, that was Alexander Navalny. He didn't hear it from anybody. But my point is that's what's going on with these guys fleeing. They're not combatants. They're not people who are going to fight. This didn't impact the Russian mobilization at all. In fact, the guys that got mobilized, I liken to the Americans that got drafted, once the World War II started. Men with families, men who were committed to the home life, didn't want to go fight a war, but they were called up and they went and did it. They're not guys waving the flag, shouting USA, USA. They're guys who realize the quickest way home is by completing the mission on the battlefield. And that's the 300,000 guys they got. Those are the guys they need to win the war. Russia doesn't need the 200,000 that ran away.
All right. So should we go to our beloved audience and handle some live questions, Scott?
Let's do
it. What do you think?
You warned me about something. Right. What are you warning me about?
Well, I was saying that it looks like we have enough time. So, that kind of primed the audience, and now they kind of expect that you're going to answer some questions. We got to the questions.
I'm ready.
The one. By the way, what's going on with Maverick? Why do we not see Maverick? Why do we not hear Maverick? What's going on?
Maverick is under tight control. Maverick has been, my editor has him under control. Maverick's not permitted to impose his will on this gathering anymore. He's the head of security. His job is to do patrols and keep us safe. He truly is that cute, by the way. He's a good dog.
All right. We need to get a little smoother on those Maverick moves. Jaideep Bhattacharya. Hold on. Let me try that again. Jaideep Bhattacharya. How's that? Why do you think American Bhattacharya? All right. Why do you think American Britain supported Russia in World War II? Why not support Hitler, who wanted to destroy Russia, given that USA and Britain is perfectly willing to support the Nazi element as we see in Ukraine?
Well, it's just a simple matter of chronology. It was Germany that invaded Poland in September of 1939, which prompted France and Great Britain to activate their alliance with Poland and go to war with Germany. So the decision by Great Britain to go to war with Russia or with Germany predated any conflict, any concept of a German-Russian conflict. France, of course, was kicked out of the war fundamentally in May, June of 1940, leaving Britain to stand alone. The United States, throughout 1940 and 1941, enacted Lend-Lease and was doing convoys to support the British. So we were committed to supporting Britain against Germany before Germany invaded Russia, bringing or Soviet Union into the war. Once Germany invaded the Soviet Union, we realized that the best way to defeat Germany was to keep the Soviet Union in the fight so that the Soviet Union and the Eastern Front sucked the majority of German combat power away from the fronts we were fighting on. So we supported Russia in World War II because Russia enabled us to win this conflict. It would have been a much more difficult fight had we not supported the Soviet Union. Had Germany knocked the Soviet Union out, not only would they get the strategic depth that comes from now occupying Russia, they would get the industry, they would get the resources, and suddenly we will find that maybe there's a Germany that can't be beaten. So, we were never going to support Hitler. I know there was a lot of, England has, you can find the photographs of the people giving the Nazi salutes, and in the United States we had the German leagues and things of that nature. Lindenberg was a big fan of the Germans, but we weren't going to support Germany in that war. We were going to support England, and we did support England. And then Russia got involved, and we supported Russia. That's what it is.
So a lovely woman in Houston was asking what we're drinking. I'm having a California Cabernet.
I'm having a New York Diet Coke.
A New York Diet Coke, okay. Jungle Gin. Haiti is still being made to suffer for its revolution 200 years ago. Will the decline of the U.S. empire ease Haiti's suffering or increase it?
Well, Haiti is what we would call low-hanging fruit, which means it doesn't take too much effort to get involved in Haiti. Haiti's in our backyard. As the U.S. empire declines and contracts, Haiti will always be within the American sphere of influence. So unfortunately for the Haitian people, the United States will always be involved in the affairs of Haiti.
Okay. Klaus Vatny of the John Vossi Project. Do you think the back channels between U.S. and Russia are working well enough so that there is, in effect, more stability than what it seems?
We have a CIA director named William Burns who actually wrote a book called The Back Channel, and that's what he's known for. He was never a CIA guy. He was always an American diplomat, and he was known for his behind-the-scenes diplomacy. And one of the reasons why he was selected as the CIA director was to open up critical back channels. And he's a former U.S. ambassador to Russia, so one can only assume that he would be the ideal person to carry out this, back channel diplomacy if it was taking place. I believe that William Burns is doing just that. But the other reason why you pick the CIA to do back channel and not the State Department is because you want to keep it secret, especially in politically sensitive times where Joe Biden has positioned himself to be, the golden knight standing up to the black knight that is Vladimir Putin. So you can't be sitting there and having a known interaction with the Russians while you're posturing yourself against the Russians. The Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I went to college in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Franklin and Marshall College. I'm sorry. I know I'm not allowed to let these things distract me, but I saw that one.
You keep saying you're not allowed to do that.
I do believe that there's a back channel taking place, but I also think it's because it's being conducted by a professional who understands the importance of back channels, and it's done by the CIA, that we're not going to see too much about that. Now, that's a good thing. And yes, I do think the back channel allows for the kind of communication that must occur to keep things on the straight and level so that we don't go lurching left and right, back and forth at a time when people are talking about nuclear weapons. So, yeah, that's my feeling on the back channel.
All right. Let's move on to the next question from Tidros Baitwa. What do you think about Paul Craig Roberts' opinion on what is going on with the war? How Putin is mishandling the war, allowing provocations leading to World War III?
Look, I have a lot of respect for Paul Craig Roberts. I think he's put out a lot of really fine analysis, especially on topics that deal with the economy. I read the article in question, and I have to say I disagree with him fundamentally. I think his article shows just a basic misunderstanding of Russia, what Russia is. And from that, he's not in a position to adequately assess Russian goals and objectives. I don't think he spent enough time reading Putin's speeches. I don't think he spent enough time familiarizing himself with Russian history, the history that Putin refers to. And I don't think that he is, paid close enough attention to the real issues that are derived from the notion of Russia fighting Ukraine. I had an interesting conversation with Mr. Kulikov, a Russian historian and political scientist, this week, in fact. And, he made the point that you can't just sit here and say that Russia goes to war against Ukraine, because that's what Paul Craig Roberts is saying. You must go to war. Anything short of war is you're being foolish. You're being fooled. You're being led down the wrong path. Hey, Paul Craig Roberts, what would you say if New York and New Jersey went to war? After years of peaceful coexistence, where New York girls go hunt down New York boys and New York boys go hunt down New York girls, they get married, they have families in both states, they visit each other, they party with each other, they go to Six Flags, whether it's in New Jersey or in New York. What would you say now? They're at war with one another, and what? They're supposed to learn to hate each other and wage war against each other as if that's the frickin' enemy? No way, man. You need to learn about Russian history. You need to learn about the closeness between the Russian people and the Ukrainian people. Don't pretend that Russia can just hit a switch and go to war. It's not that easy, and that's where you got it fundamentally wrong. Russia's waging a special military operation because this conflict is unlike anything we in the West can comprehend.
All right. Also, never trust a guy with three names. Also, that's just pretentious.
William Scott Ritter. Come on, man.
But you don't use it. You don't use all.
I don't. You're right.
Gina Del Grata Glagliaglia. What do you think will be Zelensky's end? Done away with by Putin and/or NATO? Also, will Kiev be overtaken? Will Ukraine cease to exist? Hey, that's too many questions. Who can even remember them all, let alone answer them?
How do I think Zelensky's going to end? I think Zelensky's going to be assassinated by the Ukrainian military. That's my personal belief. If he's smart, he'll realize that's what's going to happen to him, and he'll flee. But if he sticks around too long, I think the Ukrainian military is going to recognize that he's the problem and a bullet is the solution. How will Kiev be overtaken? I think that once Zelensky is killed and his inner circle is purged, that Kiev will be surrendered. And there will be a negotiated conclusion that will have a limited number of Russian troops making a presence just to make sure that everything's kosher. But in the end, Kiev will be turned over to a new political authority selected by Russia. Will Ukraine cease to exist? That's up to Ukraine. I personally believe that Ukraine is probably going to lose up to 4 more oblasts by the time this is done. Odessa, Kharkiv, Nikolaev, and Dnipropetrovsk. I believe that the final status of Western Ukraine is uncertain at this point in time. Who's going to finally control it? I don't believe it will be the Poles, but it could be Belarus. Who knows? It's not going to be allowed to exist as a standalone entity festering with Banderist ideology. That will be purged. But I honestly believe that at the end of this, because Ukraine is being used by NATO and the United States, that this conflict will go on too long. And as a result, Ukraine will be destroyed as a nation state. And what ultimately emerges will not look anything like what Ukraine's looked like when the conflict started.
All right. 3 questions, 3 answers. That was 4. Sorry. Igor's back. Scott, do you know that Ukraine is paying with U.S. taxpayers' money for ISIS terrorists to fight? We just captured 6 ISIS fighters. I'm in Bakhmut now.
Well, congratulations on capturing 6 ISIS fighters. It's not just the ISIS terrorists that, I've heard stories about this. I personally can't confirm any of this, but I've heard that the United States has a list of names of people that we have trained to bring down the Assad regime. These are people affiliated with Al Qaeda and ISIS that have received U.S. training. We know who they are. And I believe that the CIA is enabling a pipeline that brings these personnel from Syria to Ukraine to fight on behalf of Ukraine. It disgusts me, not only because of the quality of these individuals. I don't hold them in high regard at all. They're terrorists belonging to terrorist organizations. But it's not just that we're paying money to these fighters on the front, these terrorists. That money's going to Al Qaeda, ISIS, as organizations. That means the United States is funding Al Qaeda, the organization that took down the Twin Towers, the organization that blew up the Pentagon, the organization that tried to blow up the U.S. Capitol. We're paying them right now, not just the people on the ground. We're paying the organizational structures, and they're going to use that money as they see fit. You know what they may do with that money? They may go and buy Javelin missiles and Stinger missiles that we provided to the Ukrainians, who have then sold them on the black market to terrorist and criminal elements in Europe. The Germans just found a Stinger missile from Ukraine in Germany, getting ready to shoot down an airliner. So now we have Al Qaeda using American money, buying American weapons that we gave to the Ukrainians, who sold it on the black market. And who are they going to use them against? This is ridiculous. There it is. We're getting ISIS from northern Syria. They're traveling from Turkey. There's no doubt in my mind that this is taking place. You're probably also getting a bunch of Americans that are traveling in from New Jersey. You're probably getting against a Frenchman coming in from Marseille. You're getting a bunch of mercenaries that are getting paid $2,000 to $4,000 a day to fight in Ukraine. They call them, I think the term that they use is executive protection services. That's the contract vehicle under which they're recruited. That's a euphemism for people who have special close-in protection skills, people who are trained to do diplomatic protection, etc. These guys are, they're being recruited, they're being paid a hell of a lot of money, and they're fighting very hard. I mean, the Western ones especially have certain skill set, but I have to question the ultimate motivation of somebody who fights for money. Because at some point in time, that money's only good if you live to spend it. And so therefore, if your objective is to spend money at the big party that you're going to go to when the war's over, and now you're called upon to do what soldiers are often called upon, dig deep and push hard, knowing you may not make it. You might make the decision not to dig that deep, not to push that hard. That's why they're useless. I have no use for mercenaries, and that's all I'm going to say, because otherwise I might be talking about violations of international law. I don't want to do that.
Okay. Hey, it just occurred to me that MSNBC has Malcolm Nance as their soldier / reporter, and we have Igor.
We have Igor.
Of course, anybody could just be claiming to be in the Russian military. What do you think? Is there a question that you could ask him to test him?
I'm not going to do that. I'm going to assume that Igor's telling the truth. I'm not here to question the integrity of anybody.
All right. Maybe we should have him come on and talk to us sometime via webcam.
We don't want to get Igor in trouble. And remember, internet connectivity with people operating on the front line could be traced, and that'd be a good way to kill Igor. So hopefully he's using some sort of VPN cutout that disguises where he's located right now.
All right. Well, he just heard my suggestion. He can respond, and we'll see what he says.
This is an existential war. Are we in an air raid? Smoke. Stand by. 3, cruise missile caliber. Stand by.
All right. Never pass up an opportunity to mock Malcolm Nance, I say. Todd Smith has a question. I think there's a question mark at the end there. Okay, let me go to the beginning. Are Western leaders ignoring the influence upon Russians of the Great Patriotic War regarding everything from tactics to public morale?
Well, I would say that, first of all, if the Russians are using tactics derived from the Great Patriotic War today, they're in deep trouble, because tactics are a reflection of a number of things, including the technology you bring to bear. Modern weaponry dictates different tactics. The greater dispersal of your troops, the longer range of the systems, the greater lethality and accuracy all have an impact on the tactics. So I don't think that the Russians are using World War II tactics, but the morale ones, that's the important one. I don't think that the West fully comprehends the role that the Great Patriotic War plays in shaping the psyche and the psychology of modern day Russia. It's real. It's there. There are monuments in virtually every major population center in the Soviet Union that are dedicated to the sacrifice made by those who were alive at that time. The workers, the fighters, everybody. And this was real. At least 27 million people lost their lives in that conflict. There's not a family that didn't suffer, didn't feel something. So we ignore that at our own peril. And I'll tell you what, I was just reading a story today about we were using analog service. There he goes. See, the guy's, he's right on me. Do you want to
come on, Igor? Let us know if you want to come on with a webcam.
The troops are training right now, and what they said at the end of the training is, let us not shame our grandparents. Let us not shame our grandparents. Why would they say that? Because their grandparents fought in the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War. And this resonates with them. They will not shame their grandparents. How many Americans here say, I'm not going to shame my grandparent? None. We don't care. World War II is ancient history. We don't even think about Vietnam anymore. We don't even think of, it's amazing. I was a Desert Storm veteran, and people are like, what? Desert what? What? Did we fight? Oh, yeah, we had that little thing going on back then. And the longer this goes on, people are starting to forget the early phases of the conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq. That was 20 years ago. 20 years ago. Mind-boggling. It's been that long. Americans forget their history, forget the lessons of the past. But, the Great Patriotic War was almost 80 years ago, and it still resonates on a daily basis in a deep and meaningful fashion with the people in Russia today.
Don't you have to know history to begin with in order to forget it?
Wow, Jeff, you just threw a curveball at me.
Heavy. That's heavy.
I'm going to have to drink on that one.
All right. So Paulo Costorolangi Manganahamani says, what will happen to Israel? Would you prefer a little more context to that question?
I think it's a fair question. Mm-hmm. What will happen to Israel? Look, I'm somebody who spent a lot of time in Israel, and I have a deep respect for the Israeli people. I like the Israeli people. I believe Israel has a right to exist, but I don't believe Israel has a right to exist at the expense of other people. And the Israelis right now are on a track to literally totally isolating themselves in an environment where they're surrounded by, people that outnumber them by a significant number. And it's an impossible conflict to sustain. The longer Israel operates the way it currently is, with total disregard to the needs, wants, desires of the Palestinian population, the more Israel turns itself into something that can't be supported. I have to be honest. Had I been exposed to Israel today, I was exposed to Israel in the 1990s when they were led by a guy named Yitzhak Rabin. And I was familiar with the Camp David peace process. I was comfortable with the fact that Israel was working with the Palestinians imperfectly, but working with them to try and find a way to peacefully coexist. That's an Israel that I could support, did support. I can't support Israel today. Can't support what Israel has become. That doesn't mean that I want Israel to end. That doesn't mean I want harm to befall the Israeli people. But what it means is that I don't think the United States should be underwriting Israel. I don't think we should be sending money to Israel. I don't think we should be supporting this government. This government needs to be sanctioned. Israel needs to be treated like a pariah nation, because that's what it is, a pariah nation. It operates in a manner that's inconsistent with norms and values of civilized society. And so if you're going to do that, you're on the wrong side of history. And Israel on the wrong side of history means that Israel may not survive as a nation. How Israel chooses to end its existence is up to Israel. Hopefully Israel will figure out how to get on the right side of history and learn to peacefully coexist with its Arab neighbors, especially with the Palestinians. But there's a lot of hate right now. Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, Hezbollah, these people don't have much love for Israel because Israel's treated them in an abhorrent fashion. That's my answer about Israel.
Well, you certainly
how many audience members did we lose?
I was just going to say, you certainly choose your words more carefully than Kanye West chooses his when it comes to referring to Jewish people. Okay, so Igor is back. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. I don't think I can come on. I can get in trouble from my superior officers. We are not allowed to be online, but we break the rule once in the whole, but only us. Okay.
Well, thank you for breaking the rule.
All right.
State Department backs Lula.
Sparky's back.
As if he's Juan Guaido.
You want to...
he's talking about the Brazilian election for the presidential election, and Lula is a former president, sort of left-leaning. He's up against Bolsonaro. What, editor?
Editor.
Bolsonaro, yes. It was a close election. Neither one. Lula received more votes, but the election was far closer than anybody thought, and Bolsonaro is in a position where he could actually win the runoff. The United States, of course, is supporting Lula. That's what Sparky's saying, because the Biden administration doesn't want a right-wing, right-leaning president of Brazil. Why? Well, Brazil is part of this organization called BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now we have Iran and Argentina are members as well. So it's BRICSia. But, so we prefer that the head of BRICS, the B in the BRICS, is somebody that we can control. Did they get to him? I don't know. I can't comment on that. I don't know. I do know that the United States does get to politicians. We get to them one way or another. We put pressure on them. We buy them. We fund their opponents. So let's see. Loris Wilkerson believes Israel will not exist in 20 years. I share Loris Wilkinson's assessment. That's tragic because there's 6 million Israeli citizens who are going to be put in quite a bind. But anyways, that's what I get for answering the pop-up question.
The best kind of correct.
Okay, let's move on to our next question from... Is that an order or a suggestion, I wonder? Maybe neither. What do you think the future of Syria is?
I think the future of Syria is quite good. It's in the opposite trajectory of Israel. Syria is on the right side of history. The government of Bashar al-Assad is stronger than it's ever been. He's been put through the kind of crucible that very few leaders are put through, and he's survived. He's thrived. He's emerged as a real leader. His country is rallying behind him. Just take a look at what he's done with Aleppo, a city that was, destroyed because it was occupied by these Islamic terrorists. And with Russian help, Iranian help, Hezbollah help, the Syrian army was able to regain control of the totality of Aleppo. And it's just it's a miracle, the transformation that's taking place, the reconstruction, the quality of life, markets, businesses, everything. That's because of the quality of the leadership that Bashar al-Assad is providing. He's a smart leader, and I think he is going to take Syria great places. Syria was a pariah state for a while. The Arab League, basically had nothing to do with them. Now all the Arabs are coming back to Syria saying, hey, what can we do? Why? Well, Syria is a close ally with Russia right now. And guess who's a big player in the world today? Russia. And so all these Arab nations that want to line up with Russia, be a pal of Russia, realize that one of the best ways to Moscow is through Damascus.
All right. I think Tori might be having an affair with Sparky. We're going to have to rename this show the Sparky Show. Remember Sparky Lyle, Scott?
I know who Sparky Lyle is, yes.
Me too. When he played for the Yankees, he was Sparky Lyle. And when he played for the Red Sox, he was Sparky Lyle.
Those are accents. I'm not allowed to do them. So don't tempt me.
You're having a lot of rules imposed on you.
Oh, you wouldn't believe the amount of rules that have been imposed on me.
I don't even know all of them, huh? All right.
No. And
let's see what Gene S. has to say. According to CNBC, the mobilization will end in 2 weeks. Also, no new strikes on Ukraine are needed. So is the Kremlin freezing the conflict?
CNBC is the...
It's a financial channel, right?
It's a financial channel of the NBC family.
Which is under the wings of General Electric, which makes war weapons, right?
Yeah, and they're not known for their neutral stance on issues pertaining to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
How would CNBC know about when the mobilization is going in? You know who I'm going to listen to? Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin says that 222,000 of the 300,000 targeted for partial mobilization have been mobilized and are undergoing training. He actually broke the numbers down. A significant number of them, I think it might have been around 70,000, have already been sent to the forward areas and are being integrated into the units as they speak. Others are being formed into other units. He also said that we may not reach the total 300,000. What he means by that is they brought in 300,000, but some of them were sent home because they were too old, they didn't meet the medical requirements, etc. And they may not have backfilled those guys. So when the mobilization is done, we may find that only 250,000 were mobilized out of the reservists. But we also have to keep in mind that somewhere in the vicinity of 80 to 100,000 volunteers have come up at the same time, and they're being trained. Don't do your Maine accent. Well, go ahead.
But I don't even know what a Maine accent is. Do they have an accent in Maine?
Ayup. I think they say Ayup. But I'm going to get in trouble for the Maine crowd. We're going to lose a lot of viewers tonight. We lost the Israeli crowd. We're going to lose the Maine crowd. But no,
getting back to this other question, we can check with Igor, our man on the inside. So forget CNBC. We've got Igor.
We got the insider. Well, Igor's got to be careful. We don't want his bosses finding out that he's on an analog channel.
Too late. All right, let's go to the next question. Tori, what do you got there for us? How many more questions you want to do, Scott? 3 more? 5 more? 2 more? 3 more. Well, what's that? 3, right? Okay. Bald Eagle, why is the UN not calling out the U.S. for its misbehaviors? Iraq, Libya, Ukraine, etc.
Because the UN works for America. Look, I was at the UN. I know what goes on. The arm twisting that goes on. While we were there, one of the big controversies that occurred was we were having this meeting of the Special Commission to talk about Iraq. And the Security Council was meeting, and we needed this vote to go our way. And next thing you know, you have the NSA all over the UN, intercepting, bugging hotels, intercepting phone calls, basically spying on everybody, and then taking that information and using it to blackmail people. Now, I'm not giving away state secrets here. This was all exposed by the newspapers that found out about it. But you have diplomats from Africa who are now compromised, being blackmailed by the United States to vote a certain way. And then the United States is getting a heads up on the positions of other nations when they put together their negotiating position. The U.S. is getting an advance notice so that they can prepare a response ahead of time. That's what the U.S. does. It bullies, it cajoles, it pressures. And so the UN will never do anything. The other thing is, take a look at who pays for the UN. The majority of the money that makes the UN exist comes from the United States. And at any time, the United States can just turn off the spigot. And we've done that in the past. So the UN is never going to condemn the United States, ever. Just that's the truth.
Plus, you got to come here to go to the UN, right? New York, baby.
Well, the Russians may not want to be here. We tried to stop the Russians from coming. We can't do that by law, by treaty. And yet we sat there and, no, we reject the Russians. We can't let them into the last second. Russia and other parts of the world are starting to get fed up. And again, here, let's talk about the UN. They're bragging about this vote in the General Assembly. 115 nations out of 100 and some odd voted against Russia, the majority of the world. But take the populations of the nations that didn't vote against Russia, and you'll find out that the majority of the world, by population, actually supports the Russians. So the UN can be a very misleading concept when you start counting nations, because a lot of the nations they're counting are very small and very susceptible to the foreign aid provided by the United States. So they will not vote in a way that causes them to lose the largesse coming out of Washington, D.C. It's not a vote about principle or morality. It's a vote about, economic survival.
Okay, 2 more questions, Scott. Anton Ivanov asks, what can you say about the ongoing protests in Iran?
What can we say about that? First of all, we have to recognize that there are many women in Iran who find the laws about the hijab objectionable, and their point of view gets magnified here in the West by women who just reject that concept totally. But those women are a minority in Iran. Iran is actually a very conservative religious nation. You know what's not playing on the TV? The CIA has done a great job of training young Iranians how to use social media. They teach them how to use these cameras, these cell phones, and how to capture video, and then get the video out so it can be played over and over again, not only on social media, but on mainstream media. There's a direct feed from Iran to CNBC, to MSNBC, to CNN, to BBC. And so this is out there. You know what's not being shown? That the streets of Iran cities are filled with women and conservative men out there demonstrating in support of the government. The anti-government demonstrations look impressive depending on the camera angle that you take. They're trained to do that. How do you make 100 people look like 1,000 people? Just make sure there's no gaps and you move it around and it looks impressive. But if you pull back, suddenly you realize, oh, there's not too many people there. There ain't no pulling back from a pro-government demonstration. The streets are packed, loaded with people. Iran is a fundamentally conservative nation that supports a fundamentally conservative government. Now, the other thing that's going on here is, this girl, this 25-year-old girl who died. It's tragic. Any death is tragic. But if you take a look at the videotape of what happened, she wasn't assaulted. She had an underlying pre-existing health condition. And I think she got very upset with what the lady said about how she was dressed. And then there was no physical contact. The lady touched her clothing, just lifted it up, and then she was talking to her. That there's no slapping, and the girl turned around and then appeared to have a heart attack, fell face first into a chair, and then they tried to revive her, took her to the hospital, and she died. Suddenly, it got turned into she was killed in police custody. And that's what generated all this protest. She wasn't killed in police custody. She died in police custody because she had a heart attack that was generated by a pre-existing condition that might have been exacerbated by her emotional state. But the notion that she was tortured to death or somehow maltreated is absurd in the extreme. And yet that's the story that took off, that was played here in the United States and then fed back into Iran using the BBC, the Radio Liberty, and things of like that nature, fed back in to a segment of Iranian society that then operates as they have been instructed to do. We saw this in 2009 with the so-called Green Revolution that protested against Ahmadinejad winning the election. This was all CIA funded, coordinated. The guy, there was a guy, Cohen, can't remember his first name, but he was a young kid, worked for the State Department. But he's the guy that famously or infamously made the phone call to Twitter because the Iranians were trained how to use Twitter, and they're sitting there blasting out all these tweets about what's going on, and Twitter was going to shut down for maintenance. So he gets on the phone and says, keep it open, keep it open. We need to keep it open. So the U.S. government ordered Twitter to keep it functioning so the Iranians that we trained could continue broadcasting information out so the mainstream media could blow it up. But the Green Revolution was, I mean, it was real, but it wasn't as real as we made it out to be. There's actually much more support for the Iranian government. The theocracy has a much more solid base of support than the West understands. That's a reality. It's a tragedy what happened to that girl. And would I like women to have greater rights in Iran? Of course I would. But it's not my choice. It's not my decision. It's the decision of the Iranian people. And I think the Iranian people have made their choice. And that is right now they're rallying around the theocracy. They're not siding with, and we call this democracy, but understand who's supporting this. Monarchists, people who are supporting the Shah's son or grandson, whoever's still in Los Angeles out there. These are people supporting the MEK, the Mujahideen al-Khalq, a terrorist organization right now based out of Albania, who not only assassinated Americans back in the 1970s, but they assassinate people throughout Iran. They work for Israeli intelligence. They're the ones who helped fabricate the intelligence about the Iranian nuclear program. They're there. They have various separatist groups. They support these Arab groups in Avaz. They support the Azeris in the north. So we pick these groups, we raise them up, we support the Kurds. And they create the perception of this anti-government sentiment that simply doesn't exist in mainstream Iranian society. So I think the protests we're seeing on TV are being magnified by our media to be bigger than they are, and we're not catching the reality that in many ways they're instigated by the CIA.
Have you heard from our Iranian friend Mitra lately?
I have not.
Oh, okay, hope she's okay. All right, so we've come to our final question. Jamie Lee McFadden. I'm going to let that one slide. I won't inflict my three-name bias against that because that's a hyphenated name, so that doesn't count as three. That's okay. Scott, why do you think more people haven't caught on to color revolutions? I want to start by saying what a color revolution. I'm sorry to interrupt, but maybe start by saying what a color revolution.
The color revolution are these Western-backed movements designed to overthrow existing regimes, and we've seen them. For instance, in Ukraine, there was, I believe, the Orange Revolution. In Georgia, it was the Rose Revolution, and in Iran, it was the Green Revolution. These color-coded revolutions that overthrow governments. The concept of caught on, caught on to the fact that color revolutions don't represent the legitimate aspirations of the majority of a people, that it's really a CIA-funded or Western intelligence-funded operation, or caught on meaning why don't more people support them? I don't know. I think that the people who live in the countries know exactly what's going on. They're not stupid. The Georgians know what happened in the Rose Revolution. The Ukrainians know what happened in the Orange Revolution. The Iranians know what happened in the Green Revolution. So it's if it's catching on, if you mean that the population catches on, they already know. That's why it was rejected. That's why the majority of people rejected some of the, especially like the Green Revolution. The West, if you mean why don't more people in the West catch on to it, and that it's a fraudulent concept, because we're prisoners to the mainstream media. We're prisoners to the same establishment that promotes these color revolutions. And in order to catch on, you have to think. And most Americans aren't thinking. We're just on full automatic. Turn on mainstream media, get entertained. Turn off mainstream media, go to bed. Go to work, come home, turn on mainstream media, get entertained, turn it off, go to bed. Repeat as much as you want.
Repeat and rinse, which is what we do every Friday night. Repeat and rinse. Tuesday, scenes from the evolution. with the winsome savant, Tori Mansfield, and myself. Our guest this week is Diane Sayre, U.S. Senate candidate, and she shares the great honor of being on the Ukraine blacklist. Spectre, and we have a T-shirt that we have for sale right there. That's our hunky spokesmodel in Texas, Ryan, who's modeling that for us. And I want to also remind folks that Scott will be appearing at Farmers and Chefs in Poughkeepsie on Wednesday, October 26th. So while everybody else is suffering economic woes, those who can afford it say, let them eat cake. The weapons inspector will be there. Buy his book, Eat Great Food, Drink Great Wine. And next Friday night, we'll be back. And thanks to Tori and thanks to Eric Foya, also known as the Engine Builder. Thank you, Scott. You doing all right? Feeling okay?
I'm feeling good. Thank you, Jeff. You doing all right? Some of those accents are sounding a little weak. I mean,
that's true, but
you're off.
I am feeling fine, though. I'm at the top of my game in general, if not with the accents. And I guess that's it. So we'll see you all next week at the usual time, Friday night, 8 p.m., 5 p.m. Pacific. And thanks to our beloved audience for all your support. See you next time.